I'm here with Rebecca Shafir. And Rebecca, could you briefly give our audience a sort of potted bio, I guess a summary of your background and your experience?
Oh, certainly. Well, I'm a speech and language pathologist, Sam,
Mm-hmm.
and I got most of my training in hospitals and medical settings. But then I branched out a bit to working in mental health
Okay.
because one of my interests was ADHD, people with anxiety and depression. I found it very interesting. They have communication issues of their own.
Yeah.
And just in being able to coach people to get along,
Yeah.
listen to each other, to understand each other. And that's how I started to develop the concept of mindfulness and listening, or mindful listening. What I'm doing now is I continue to work in mental health, but I'm also doing coaching. I coach entrepreneurs, I coach professionals, I coach college students
Yeah.
in helping them connect better with other people and information. So I'm having a ball doing that and seeing people succeed in their own right and move forward in their lives.
That's amazing. So you've done everything really. Um, did that all feel like a sort of fluid transition then from working in hospitals and through that course and then ending up working with entrepreneurs and helping them to achieve better success in their sort of careers and business lives? Was that sort of a fluid transition for you, or did you feel yourself sort of taking different courses along the way?
No, it's actually very fluid, Sam, and that's a great question. At the hospitals, I started getting referrals from neurology, pediatrics, general internal medicine, psychiatry, for people who had ADHD, attention deficit
Yeah.
disorder, or just difficulties in learning. And I was saying, boy, this is a niche of its own here. And I started reading about the condition and
Yeah.
finding that it's much greater, wider spread than even the statistics call for it. But these people have communication issues of their own. So when I, in the same time I was writing the book, The Zen of Listening, Mindful Communication in the Age of Distraction, it all seemed to come together.
Yeah.
And then Dr. Hallowell, Dr. Edward Hallowell, who wrote the book Driven to Distraction, read about my book, and he brought me onto his practice.
Okay.
And that's how I made that fluid transition to helping people with some mental health conditions communicate better. And
Yeah. ADHD's, I've worked with clients with ADHD as well, not in as professional a capacity as you, but it's a tough one, isn't it? Because it almost feels like they've got all the same capabilities and all of the tools available, but it's just that incessant distraction that keeps coming that makes it really difficult for them to be active, mindful listeners, and for them to make their interlocutor, the person with whom they're speaking, feel valued as well, even though they may really tremendously value that person. It doesn't. It's difficult for them to communicate that, isn't it?
oh, it certainly is. And you know something too? There's a lot of us who have attention deficit traits.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's hard to distinguish the person with the actual clinical condition of ADHD and just the people around us who are so distracted, not only internally, but externally. So
Yeah.
it's becoming a massive problem, not just,
Yeah.
I just not just localized to people with ADHD.
Yeah, that's very true. How would you, I suppose, if you were speaking with a client and you wanted to understand more about them and maybe the way their mind works and how they think, how would you recognize traits of mindless listening in the clients that you work with or the people with whom you speak?
Oh, very interesting question, Sam. Well, I like to get people talking about themselves.
Yeah.
And one of the things I'm pretty good at is remaining silent. Of course, not on this podcast. That's not my job here.
No.
But when you allow the silence, you get to see how people's minds are working. You
Mm.
get to see how organized they are. You get to see if they're jumping from one thing to another. You can see if they're making eye contact or what their verbal or nonverbal uh, body language is telling you.
Yeah.
Tells you an awful lot. When you're asked a question, you can see how quickly do they interrupt, do they give you advice, do they ramble on, or do they deny your experience? These are all very interesting kinds of behaviors that we see in conversations that don't go so well.
Yeah.
You know, and it's not just localized again to people with ADHD. It's people who just have trouble connecting not only with themselves but with others. So these are some of the things that I look for in that kind of a conversation. It helps me understand the difficulties they're having in their relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And in terms of your book, The Zen of Listening, how did you find, I suppose, that that crossing of the mindfulness practice, the Zen practice, and the sort of more executive function and active behavioral change? Where did you find that sort of crossroads? Was there some mindfulness or spiritual practice that you were engaging with that brought sort of those two aspects together?
Yes, I think that I had studied meditation and practiced it for many years. And I felt that what it allowed me to do was to be quiet in my head, stay in the moment, and stay focused. And for people who have difficulties with executive functioning, as you mentioned, and executive functioning, for those who are not familiar with that term, I put it in a nutshell definition as something that getting work done, getting things done well and on time. Basically, that's executive function. And if we're having trouble calming ourselves, if we're having trouble focusing, if we're having trouble with our emotional regulation because of that disorganization internally, we're going to have a heck of a time getting things done well, and on time. So there is a connection. So mindfulness and meditation helps you stay in the moment, helps improve your ability to focus and concentrate and relax so that you can actually take in information about what someone is saying and not just hear them, but to really understand them. And that's a big difference between, what they teach in companies, the active listening, which is what I call act like you're listening, versus mindful listening, which is a wholehearted curiosity, just trying to understand where that person comes from. I hope that answers your question somewhat.
That answers with clarity and precision. So thank you for that. So I suppose just on the topic of active listening, I suppose we'd describe it as the appearance of listening in order to make the other person feel valued, but not actually engaging in real mindful listening. What do you? I mean, why would anybody teach active listening when they could teach mindful listening? What's missing in that equation? When companies are teaching people to be active listeners but not mindful listeners.
They do that because they really don't understand the mechanism behind wholehearted mindfulness. Okay? The active listening classes, and this is one of the things that made me write this book, Sam, was because I would attend some of these active listening classes and I was appalled because they were teaching people, again, how to act like they were listening, how to mirror the person's movement, how to lean in and maintain laser focus, which can be very uncomfortable, frankly. It's artificial. You're thinking about what you're supposed to do to act like you're listening versus actually receiving that information. So that's why I wanted to turn that on it at 180 degrees and come up with my own definition of what I mean by mindful listening and teach that instead, which is really, that's the real connection. And there's 4 characteristics of mindful listeners. Let me tell you what they are. Number 1, that ability to get as much as you can the whole message, not just the verbal, but the nonverbal. That said that, people are very good at hiding a lot of information. I mean, you know, getting pretty good at kind of having poker faces. You have to do your very best, though, to take in what you can from what they're saying and what they're putting out there. That's the first characteristic. The second characteristic is being able to sustain your attention over time. And it doesn't mean that you be a good listener, you have to be able to sit for hours. It just means you have to be able to lock in for a good few minutes, which is, better than most when you think the attention ability, that the attention span that people have is maybe 20 seconds.
Yeah.
If you can endure a conversation for 2 minutes, you're ahead of the game, you know? So to sustain your attention over time. Number three, to make that person feel valued and respected, even if you don't agree with them. And number four,
Yeah.
the most difficult but most necessary is listening to yourself as you. That's the difference between active listening and mindful.
Thank you for that. So, in terms of listening to yourself, I suppose the first four are sort of, they're clearly not obvious because people don't do them, but they're sort of self-evident. You can understand that intellectually. But the fifth one feels a little more esoteric, maybe. How does one listen to oneself as one is speaking or in conversation? That seems a little more complicated. How would you advise people to take that fifth step in their stride and really listen to themselves in conversation?
Yes. There's four traits called, well, I call it raid. I say, don't raid the conversation.
Okay.
RAID. Okay. And this is very helpful for your couples. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So raid, don't raid the conversation. Here's some things. R stands for rambling.
Okay.
Okay. Notice if people are starting to get itchy in their chair, they're starting to look around, their eyes start to glaze over. Pick up some of these cues. These are some of the things I do in my seminars. Is know when you have to stop rambling. Okay.
Yeah.
A stands for advice giving. Don't give unsolicited advice. Give only advice if people ask for it. It'll be appreciated that way. You mean well to give advice. Parents often overwhelm the advice because they think they're doing something to help this person not repeat the same mistakes they made, right? So they overdo it on the advice. I stands for interruption. Probably the most uh, I would call it almost nefarious habit that people have is interrupting. And that's really annoying. You see. And D stands for denial. Don't deny someone's reality. We do this all the time. Oh, I lost my job. I'm miserable. Oh, you'll find another one. You're okay. These are some of the very subtle acts of denial that are verbally expressed that are very offensive, and very not helpful to a relationship. So basically, I say, Sam, don't raid the conversation. Start there. That's huge.
Again, Rebecca, you've got me again. Where the first three, the RAI, are sort of you can think, okay, I can do that, but then the final one again is you've thrown a curveball in at the end there with the D, which is denying someone's reality, and that is really interesting because it almost seems counterintuitive. If my sister calls me up and tells me, Sam, I've had a really bad day. I was meant to meet up with both of my friends, and they both cancelled, and this and that. My instinct is to say, okay, that's no big deal. That's okay. Don't worry. You'll see them another time. But as you said, that's denying them their time to sort of, I don't know, is it to dwell in that feeling and to feel understood in that feeling?
That's exactly right. The better thing to say is, oh, I'm sorry that happened. Right? Because they're sharing this with you to just kind of express themselves. What are you going to do? Turn their feelings around and make them and hang up the phone and say, oh, I know she feels better now? No, she's not going to feel better now. In fact, she's going to think twice before calling you again because, you're just trying to make nothing of it. And it's important to her and it bothers her and she's trying to connect with you, but you're creating a disconnect with them.
Yeah, I think we've all experienced that as well. When you're telling someone something and you just want it to be heard, you're not looking for a way out of it. You just need that feeling of understanding. And I suppose you just put an intellectual framing around a way that we can actually understand that feeling that I think everyone's experienced of not wanting a way out of whatever situation you're in, just wanting to be able to say it and be heard.
Right. We get into the mode of having to fix things for people.
Yeah.
And that is jumping into a role that they're not asking you to participate. That's not what they want. And why is it that we know this, but we will turn the tables on someone else? But if we're calling, if you are the one calling and saying, hey, my friend didn't show up and I'm feeling bummed out, you certainly wouldn't want her to come out and say, oh, come on, get over it, Sam. Right? So why do we do this to others? I always find that fascinating.
Yeah, it's counterintuitive, isn't it? It's very interesting. And another, I know we're sort of going all over the place here, but in terms of the advice giving, that's an interesting one. You mentioned, a parent maybe giving a child advice. How if a child, so let's say if a child is misbehaving because they're experiencing some level of disconnect or they're going through an experience, and it's a parent's instinct to say, now we don't do that because of this, this, and this, and go into that sort of authoritarian lecturer mode. How should parents be viewing their relationship with their child when a child is maybe disobeying them or they want to give that child advice? How should they view themselves in relation to that child so that they can make the child feel understood, but still provide them with the guidelines of how they should and shouldn't behave in the world and throughout their life?
Well, certainly, when anyone is upset or in a panicky situation or very, very emotional, you want to wait until that calms down a bit before you start talking at all, right? Because they're not hearing you. You might as well be speaking Swahili. They're not hearing you at all. They're too much into their internal distraction, right?
Yeah.
I would say first try to calm the scene a little bit and to allow the silence and make sure that they've expressed what they're feeling, what happened, the whole thing without interruption. Okay, let them go on. And then after they've given maybe about, 30 seconds to a minute of silence, they're probably at the end of their rope. And that's when you can say, okay, let me understand what happened. Let me see if I understand how you're feeling. And in your own words, you can tell back the situation. Now, what you've done there is you have now set yourself on the same level. You've avoided the denial. You haven't gotten into the interruption mode, and you haven't started rambling or giving advice. Bravo.
Yeah.
The next step after that is to offer, this is what I would have done in this case, or this is what I would suggest. But that's it. You want to hear? Are you interested? I have a solution, maybe. You want to hear? And they may not be in the mood to hear it. They're still in their, fury and frenzy, which is fine. Because then, keep it to yourself. But what you're saying is, by the way, when you settle down, come talk to me. Have some ideas. That's how, as a parent, or even as a spouse or a partner, how I would address that in a much more effective way.
That's really interesting. I've been thinking a lot about that myself, with relation specifically to my clients, because sometimes it is easy as a teacher or as a coach to fall into that frame of I'm here to tell you what you should and shouldn't be doing. And you have to remain incredibly mindful when you're in a position of power that you are at every moment putting your client on the same level as you, understanding that they're human in exactly the same way, and that your only focus here is to make sure that they get the best experience out of the coaching, that they get the greatest potential for improvement. And so we have to be extremely, I have to be extremely mindful always as a coach. And one way that I've found to do that is if they tell me, a problem or something that's gone wrong in their life, instead of telling them what they should do, I just start talking about when I had a similar experience and what I did. And I don't even say that as an answer to what they've told me. It's just a separate comment about something that happened to me that reflects their situation. And sometimes I think they just hear it, what I did, and it's almost planting in their head how they could then act in that situation without telling them how to do it. Do you think that's a sort of that seems sort of related to me, that idea of hearing them and understanding them, and without telling them what to do, you sort of suggesting another way that they might be able to deal with it.
Sam, that is so much more effective than saying, okay, this is what you need to do. I like that very much. And you know, another thing that's really helpful is to say, okay, what do you think you should do? What solutions have you? Let's talk. You know, you probably have some good solutions. Let's talk those through first. What do you think?